Councilman Carl Stokes says something needs to be done.
There's no doubt that the local law enforcement and maybe the local government is overwhelmed by the level of violence in our town.
What happens when crime takes control of a city?
It's been another violent month on the streets of Baltimore City. This time, 45 people have been murdered in July.
From mafia empires to serial killers and riots.
Now, the latest victims, 18-year-old Jermaine Mitter, the nephew of a Baltimore City detective.
These real-life cases show how darkness can overwhelm even the greatest cities. Don't miss out. Discover the chilling truth behind the chaos. Watch now before it's too late. The rise of the mafia. In the early 1900s, New York City was a bustling metropolis full of energy, but it also had a dark undercurrent. As immigration grew, crime began to flourish. The city, particularly Manhattan, became the heart of a criminal revolution. By 1920, the Prohibition era ignited a surge in organized crime. Speakeasies popped up, and the illegal alcohol trade became a lucrative business. But one man was at the center of it all: Charles "Lucky" Luciano. Luciano, a born gangster, saw the chaos as an opportunity. Instead of fighting the other crime families, he unified them. This was the beginning of the modern mafia. Luciano's vision was simple: control the streets, control the money. By the mid-1930s, he had formed the Genovese, Gambino, and Lucchese families into a single, powerful force. New York became a playground for these mafia families, and every business, from restaurants to construction, was touched by crime. They operated in the shadows, but their reach was everywhere. Murder, robbery, extortion, these were their tools. Murder, in particular, was part of their daily work, often used to settle disputes or expand their empire. But it wasn't just the mafia making headlines. The police were either paid off or too scared to intervene. In 1931, Luciano was arrested and sent to prison, but the mafia didn't slow down. Instead, they adapted. In his absence, Frank Costello took control, becoming the city's new kingpin. Under his rule, the mafia's influence grew stronger, especially within political circles. By the 1940s, the mafia had a stranglehold on New York, and no one was safe from their reach. But eventually, the mafia's power began to crumble. In the 1950s, the government cracked down on organized crime, and investigations started to expose their secrets. The likes of Joe Valachi turned state's evidence, revealing the hidden world of mafia operations. Despite their efforts to maintain control, the mafia's grip on New York slowly loosened. By the end of the 1970s, the once invincible crime syndicates had been broken down, but the legacy of Luciano and his mafia family still looms large. This story of New York's mafia takeover is a stark reminder of what happens when crime overwhelms a city. The streets might seem under control, but the shadows are always full of danger. The golden age of serial killers. In the 1970s, America was gripped by fear. The streets, once filled with life and laughter, became the hunting grounds for some of the most notorious serial killers in history. Cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York were all under siege by killers who seemed to come out of nowhere, terrorizing communities without remorse. Among them, the most infamous were Ted Bundy, the Zodiac Killer, and Son of Sam. Ted Bundy was charming, intelligent, and terrifying. He was a master of deception, fooling people with his innocent appearance. But beneath the surface, he was a cold-blooded killer, responsible for the brutal deaths of over 30 young women across multiple states. His killing spree began in 1974 and lasted until 1978, leaving law enforcement baffled and the public in a state of panic. Meanwhile, in California, a killer who would come to be known as the Zodiac terrorized the Bay Area. Starting in 1968, the Zodiac killed at least 5 victims, sending taunting letters to the police and newspapers. His cryptic messages, filled with strange codes, kept investigators guessing for years. The Zodiac's true identity remains a mystery to this day, making him one of the most elusive killers in history. In New York City, another serial killer was at work: David Berkowitz, better known as Son of Sam. Between 1976 and 1977, Berkowitz murdered 6 people and wounded several others, sending fear through the streets of the city. His letters to the police, claiming to be influenced by a demon, captivated the media and kept the city on edge. It wasn't until 1977 that he was caught, but the terror he spread through the city still lingers in the memories of New Yorkers. The 1970s was indeed the golden age of serial killers. With each case more chilling than the last, the city streets became a battlefield between law enforcement and those who sought to inflict terror. These killers left scars on the cities they ravaged, and their stories continue to haunt the public's imagination to this day. The Blackout Murders. On the night of July 13, 1977, New York City was plunged into chaos. A power outage struck, leaving the city in complete darkness for nearly 25 hours. What should have been a temporary inconvenience turned into a night of terror as the blackout became the perfect cover for crime. With the lights off, criminals took full advantage, unleashing a wave of looting, arson, and violence that overwhelmed the city's law enforcement. The blackout marked a turning point for New York. Looters flooded the streets, breaking into stores, smashing windows, and stealing whatever they could find. Stores were ransacked, with televisions, radios, and electronics flying off the shelves. But it wasn't just theft that plagued the city. Arsonists set fire to buildings, leaving parts of the city in flames. The police were overwhelmed and unable to respond effectively, as the blackout made it nearly impossible to maintain control. Amid this chaos, something even darker emerged. The murder rate skyrocketed, and by the time the lights returned, several people had been killed. One of the most chilling incidents occurred in the Bronx, where the city's residents lived in constant fear. The blackout emboldened criminals, and the violence surged to levels not seen before. Many of the murders were random, committed by individuals who had been waiting for the opportunity to strike in the darkness. During the blackout, the notorious Son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz, reportedly struck once more, adding to the horror of the night. Although no confirmed kills were linked to him during the blackout, the eerie possibility of his presence in the chaos added to the terror felt across the city. When the power was finally restored, the aftermath was shocking. 1,000 arrests were made, and the damage was estimated in the millions. New York had survived the blackout, but it had come at a cost. The city's fear, fueled by the previous crimes of the 1970s, had reached new heights. What was meant to be a temporary loss of power had exposed the cracks in New York's social fabric, forever marking the night when crime truly overwhelmed the city. Chicago's crime wave. In the 1920s, Chicago became the epicenter of organized crime in America. The rise of Al Capone and his Chicago outfit turned the city into a lawless haven for bootlegging, gambling, and murder. As Prohibition hit in 1920, Capone seized the opportunity to control the illegal alcohol trade. His ruthless tactics and vast network of bribed officials, police, and politicians allowed him to thrive, becoming the most powerful mob boss in the country. Capone's reign was marked by violence. His crew engaged in brutal killings, most famously the Street Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, where 7 members of a rival gang were gunned down in broad daylight. Despite his reign of terror, Capone's power remained strong until his conviction for tax evasion in 1931, which ended his reign but didn't erase the dark legacy he left on Chicago. The city would forever be tied to the mafia's criminal grip during this era. The 1990s crime surge. In the 1990s, Los Angeles became a battleground for gang violence, fueled by drugs and turf wars. The Crips and Bloods, 2 rival gangs, were at the heart of the city's violent crime wave. The crack cocaine epidemic hit the streets, leading to an increase in drug-related violence and shootings. Entire neighborhoods, particularly in South Central LA, were controlled by gangs, and innocent lives were often caught in the crossfire. The Rodney King riots in 1992 only worsened tensions, creating an environment where lawlessness seemed to reign. Gangs exploited the chaos, further overwhelming the city with violence. The 1990s saw a peak in crime rates, with gang-related killings and drug trafficking spiraling out of control, until law enforcement cracked down in the later years. Want to dive deeper into the minds behind these crimes? Don't miss our next video, The Science Behind Criminal Minds. What makes someone a killer? Hit subscribe now so you never miss another mind-blowing story. Trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming next.